My name is Craig Volland. I'm a member of the All Souls Unitarian Universalist Forum Committee. Welcome to the All Souls UU Church Forum. The forum's mission is to afford a platform for the discussion of significant issues, especially those which involve ethical values in the contemporary world, and also to promote critical thinking. As everyone knows, because of the pandemic, we were no longer holding our forums in person at the church since about a year and a half now. So we went on Zoom, and so we try to duplicate the experience on Zoom. And I think in most cases that we've been able to do that. This morning, we're really privileged to have Zack, whom I've known for 10 years. He has been he's had a very difficult job being the lobbyist in the Kansas legislature, lobbying for environmental progress. So you can imagine what kind of job that is. But he's lately also working with the National Sierra Club on promoting renewable energy and trying to hasten the shutdown of coal plants in Kansas. And then lately, because everybody wants a piece of his time, he's now interim director of the Kansas Rural Center. And that's because he's also linked to small farm. Kansas Rural Center is about sustainable farming. So he's very much related to agriculture, and his father is a pig farmer. So can't get more into ag. So take it away, Zack.
Well, thank you, Craig. Appreciate it. And yeah, it's been a little bit of time since we've known each other. It's certainly been a pleasure. I tell you what, I'm very lucky to have Craig as a teammate, as a mentor. Has taught me quite a bit through the years. About sustainable agriculture, about coal plants, et cetera. So we owe him a number of thanks, local foods, et cetera. So thank you, Craig. Honored to be your colleague, and honored to be with all of you today. Good morning. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you at All Souls Unitarian Universalist Church. Believe it or not, I've actually got a chance to speak with the UU congregation before. I've been part of, not at All Souls, but in Topeka and Lawrence, et cetera. So I really appreciate it. Been up to Unitarian Universalist getaway actually in Minnesota, Star Island, if anyone ever has been up there in Minnesota, but appreciate you having me on this wonderful Sunday. It was nice to have a little bit of rain this morning. If you had a little rain, thought it was fitting to talk water with you. I have some slides I hope to share with you this morning. Talk a little bit about the importance of water, the challenge ahead of us, and some of the opportunities we can face specifically here in Kansas. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. I'll have a few PowerPoints or a few points to make here, and some ideas to share about what we can do to affect change in Kansas. But of course, a big part of the conversation ought to come from you as far as questions and answers I can provide, and some thoughtful discussion of what we can do. What are we going to do, Kansas? Let's go ahead and dive right in. How about this? Water is paramount to life. I'm wanting to think about what else is more important that we can think about than water. It's one of the basic needs. There's a beautiful picture of a little sunset, Kansas sunset, water. The dock's seen better days, looks like, but just amazing at the beauty. There's one thing I asked in the legislature is, what's the most beautiful place you ever seen? Where's it at? And let it sink in for a little bit. Ask them to think about it. I asked, is it outside? Typically the answer is yes. So what is it about water and nature that really draws us in as the aesthetic. And I think there's something innate, something really deep down within us that really connects to us. So why nature is so important? It's because we are nature. We are water. 75% of roughly the human body is actually made up of water. We drink water. We can't survive more than 3 days without water in most cases, without severe illness. Don't try it, but think about how you feel without water in our bodies. We depend on it for recreation, for inspiration. We depend on it for business. And so really it's a fundamental life, and we often don't exactly realize its full value on a day-to-day basis. We take it for granted, especially here in America, where in most places you can get access to clean drinking water, but that's not always the case for folks around the world, where 1 billion people don't have access to clean drinking water. There's a picture of one of our largest bodies of water in Kansas, is the Kansas River, one of only 3 navigable, considered what are to be navigable rivers in Kansas, which means it's one of the few public access rivers across the state, or any bodies of water you can really kayak down legally. But unfortunately, water's really been compromised throughout the state. We have a problem. Let me just give you a few facts that I hope you'll be able to really take to heart. In across Kansas, we have no more than 20 years of water left remaining in certain communities. Think about that, 20 years or less of water. Some places in central Kansas have already reached a point of no return. 86% of our state stream miles, okay, so our streams, 96% of our state's lakes are impaired, either because of the use of aquatic life, recreation, or food procurement. 86% of our streams, 96% of our lakes are impaired. Over 100 of our water bodies in Kansas have been affected by harmful algal blooms. We got industrial agricultural facilities that impair our water. Water impairment by agricultural runoff is one of the chief reasons why our water is polluted across the country, according to national climate water assessments. 30% of our drinking wells in Kansas have nitrate levels greater than the maximum contaminant level for public drinking water. 30% of our domestic wells in Kansas. We have plastic just pulling out of our all sorts of water litter. This was pulled out of a nearby water source in Wichita. But look at all that. We mylar balloons, plastic bags, water bottles, glass bottles, just creating a filthy source of water. And you probably realize that across the world, we have large garbage patches in our oceans now because of plastics. And that's just really been in the past 30, 40 years, but it is increasing all the time. Indoor pollution. Craig knows a lot about this, but a large amount of our predatory fish in Kansas have mercury in them, and the mercury has become from industrial pollution, like coal plants. That we use coal for our predominant energy source for decades, and the mercury from the coal plants have shown up. Now we've done some things about that, but since cement plants, etc., produce a large source of pollution that gets into our water and gets taken up by our aquatic wildlife. I got on here in the left you might recognize. Anybody know what that is on the left? The smoke coming from, it's hard to see, but down below is fire on the water. Anybody familiar with that story? Anybody want to jump in there? No?
Well, this is Craig. That's the classic story. It's up on the Great Lakes. I don't remember exactly, but
That's
there was
right.
the burning river, which was what really propelled the environmental movement and the movement to clean up water.
Right, that's exactly right. The Cuyahoga River in Ohio caught on fire in the late 60s, and that's what spawned the first Earth Day. As Craig is talking about, prompted the Clean Water Act and all that. You imagine something so bad, such as the pollution in water actually catches on fire. Just really amazing. And we have our own struggles with water pollution today, but I just ground that in as far as context goes. One of the biggest problems, I talked about the remaining water in western Kansas. 20 years in some places, less of water. Some places are already have to drill deeper and deeper. We're talking about million-year-old water in the Ogallala High Plains aquifer that we're mining at the rate of feet per year, feet of the water. And think about, I have Cuyahoga River, but if any of you have ever been to Lake Erie, anybody been to Lake Erie? We've drained the equivalent 85% or so estimated by scientists. 85% of Lake Erie has been lost underwater, or excuse me, underground in the Ogallala aquifer. Okay, Lake Erie, for those that don't know, is 240 miles wide, 50 miles wide, 240 miles long, however you want to measure that. In some places, 210 foot deep. 115 cubic miles of water volume, 115 cubic miles. So a mile by a mile by a mile deep in Lake Erie, and we drain 85% of it in the High Plains aquifer. The chief water source for agriculture in the Midwest underground is the High Plains aquifer, which is a larger aquifer compared to the Ogallala. 85% of the state's water in Kansas is used by irrigation. Okay, this is the kicker. A large part of that, as you can see from the picture, is corn. We see crop circles. Anybody been in the plane, they go over Western Kansas and seen the crop circles. That's what is, they're mining the aquifer to produce a crop in a semi-arid climate out there in southwestern Kansas. 85% of the state's water is used by 15% of the state's farmers. Okay, 15% of the state's farmers, irrigators, use 85% of the state's water. So, in other words, all of the water used by all of the cities and towns in Kansas combined only come up to a fraction that is used by irrigation, predominantly in southwest Kansas. Isn't that amazing? And here's a good example of how it affects stream flow. Okay, there's a picture of the Erie River. This is up in northwestern Kansas, 1996. I know it's a little grainy. I kind of expanded it, so that's a little bit. Also, our cameras weren't as good as they are now in 1996. That's it in 2006. 1996, nice perennial stream, Erie River there, and then it's gone. Same can be saying for the Arkansas River, southwestern Kansas. Here's the loss of streams. 1961 on the left, and look, almost on the furthest third on the western side of the state. 1994, loss of streams, and even the density of streams looks like it's declining on the right hand side. And why is that? Because as we take more of the water source underground, there's interplay between the surface water and the groundwater. And as dry up the groundwater and the water table under the surface, that takes more moisture out of the surface level. So the predominant reason for the groundwater loss, the loss of streams, is from the groundwater decline, chiefly from irrigation in western Kansas. There's a couple facts about the number of permit holders, but one of the big reasons I put up this slide is the top 150 users of water, 22% of the state's water of that irrigation, or excuse me, of 22% of the irrigation is used by the top 150. That's just really amazing. A lot of times these are large farms. Again, it's a semi-arid climate. And then it's just a general problem of overappropriation of water rights. Here's a graph or a chart of the groundwater decline. As you can see, and this is of Ogallala Aquifer. A lot of the problem is in southwestern Kansas. Again, that's a large part of the irrigation, but there's also a problem in northwest Kansas. We'll talk a little bit more how about these, especially in northwest Kansas, they've tried to tackle the issue of groundwater decline. And a key part of that is that the yellow that you see there, a loss of feet from 2013 to 2018, 10 to 20 feet decline. It's right there. Just amazing. And here is the active water right wells in Kansas. So it's no surprise why the water table is going down so much, is because of the over appropriation of water rights to grow predominantly corn. Another problem, I'll get into back to the irrigation, but another big problem of water in Kansas is erosion, water erosion, and what they call stream bank erosion. So you can see the stream on the left. You go back just a few years later, and then there's the erosion of the problem of the stream bank just totally caving in on the right. Got another problem of toxic blue-green algae. That was one of the first slides. This is also known as harmful algal blooms. As I said, over 100 water bodies in Kansas has been affected by harmful algal blooms in the past 10 years. It's really bad stuff. There's not a very good intelligence as far as how these things occur and why, but we do know that is a large part of it is the runoff from agriculture. Is more you have fertilizers with nitrogen levels act as algae food that feed into these water bodies, some of that. But as far as why they occur, when, how, whether it's more in predominant wet conditions or dry conditions, warm conditions, there's more science to be understood about that. But it's pretty bad. This affects recreational use. It's toxic if it made animals sick and people sick. It's cost a lot in terms of shutdown on 4th of July when Milford Lake was closed. When people want to get out on the lake because of the toxic algae, just really bad for Kansas. I wanted to touch on sedimentation. Sedimentation is a big issue that the state of Kansas is worried about, again, from that erosion. As we have high water events from flooding, it's only more prevalent these days when we have 100-year and 500-year floods in certain instances, that all that sediment goes from the land, and a big part of it is agriculture, farming, all the way up to the water source, as opposed to having grassland or tree buffers between the water sources. But the sediment gets washed away and goes to our reservoirs. And as this graphic shows, with 50% of Tuttle Creek essentially now is half full of sediment. And that's storage capacity. These reservoirs are key for flood control. They're key for drinking water storage. It also costs us to having to dredge some of these things out. For example, John Redmond Reservoir, where our nuclear plant is based, we spent $20 million of Kansas taxpayer money dredging that reservoir, essentially scooping the sediment out of the lake and putting it on land. For essentially $20 million, bought us to 3.5 years of extra additional water storage. So not a good payback there for John Redmond, but dredging is expensive to begin with. If we have better practices that help the soil stay in place as opposed to running it off through the water, which also compromises aquatic ecosystems in those stream bodies, we'd be much better off having more storage in our reservoirs, having cleaner streams, etc. By 2070, they expect only 10% remaining storage capacity in Tuttle Creek unless we do something about it. Okay, I want to go to a little bit more of what we can do about it, because part of this is talking about the problems, but then of course we got to try to figure out what are our opportunities and what we need to do about it. So I think one of the biggest things we can do about it, just like what we're doing here, talking about what the problems are. This is a group discussing water in Cuba, Kansas. And so, whether it's agriculture, whether it's energy, some of those are the things we need to do, but it starts with discussion and education. We need healthy agricultural practices. So if we're dealing with agriculture is the biggest source of water, it's a big problem as far as contamination and runoff pollution, compromise, one of the chief sources for water impairment. We need to change our agricultural system really substantially. Part of that's going to be growing, less crops that go to fuel and lower energy foods up the food chain, like just for cattle. We can grow more of our fruits and vegetables in Kansas. That we should be eating more on our food plate. USDA recommends half of our food plate to be fruits and vegetables. We need to start growing more of that here in Kansas. 90% of our fruits and vegetables we import on an annual basis. That's not only a lost opportunity for Kansas, that's a top 10 agriculture state, not in fruits and vegetables. So that's lost productivity, lost job opportunity for those wanting to do farming in Kansas, but it's also a lost opportunity to actually grow foods that will matter for us, that will use less water, that we can grow with better farming practices. So that's why I put this slide up there. We need better types of agriculture. We need to regenerate the soil and use healthy soil practices. We need to use nature as a model as opposed to working against nature. We need to use as a model. And so we need to partner with nature. We need to help protect the soil by keeping ground cover on top of the crop on the land. See on the left, just totally plowing through, tilling the soil that basically scars the soil and disrupts those microorganism ecosystems. We use monoculture, and so we're only planting one crop that doesn't do very good of water saturation. With multi-crop system, some of those things will help retain the soil, provide for a better evaporation rate, meaning it won't evaporate as much, and less soil erosion going across the land. Richard, I see your hand is raised. Get to questions here pretty soon, but you have a specific question on one of these slides particularly? Okay. Well, hey, don't lose track of that. Please keep your question. We'll come back to it. Just a few more slides left. And I want to talk a little bit more about some of these issues a little deeper, but just for the purposes of the pictures, I wanted to just a few more left. But this is some of the things we talked about as far as ways we can help with the agricultural issue. Saw one of those earlier slides where all of our animals are concentrated in one area, either in barns with housing pigs or feedlots and housing cows. We could put that on a large part of it outside on the land, have them eat through grazing and some of those things, plant riparian and grassland buffer strips, which our Kansas Forestry Department has said is one of our most cost beneficial ways we can reduce not only land erosion from water events, but also water runoff and some of those things. And that's planting grassland strips, 20 feet, 30 feet, 50 feet along every stream or river across the state. So we can slow that water down from carrying the soil. We also keep vegetation on our ground, as I mentioned earlier, and use pollinator strips will help with our pollinators, etc. Energy, you saw this slide earlier about industrial pollution. Energy is a big part of it, and climate is a big part of the water equation. I failed to mention it earlier, but from 1980 to 2021, okay, so roughly 40 years, we had $23 billion related disasters affecting Kansas that were either drought or flooding. 6 flooding events, 17 drought events. Okay, that's billion-dollar disasters. Okay, so this is costing us, not in terms of natural resource depletion, not in terms of availability of drinking water, but there's an actual monetary cost from these disasters as it impacted our human communities. So I just want to ground that, because as we try to solve the problem, one of the biggest things that we can do is provide more funding. Okay, so we put more funding to state water programs. We've been chronically underfunded in state water planning and programs over the years. Last 13 years, we've lost $80 million that should have been appropriated by Kansas legislature, but didn't get to the state water plan fund as it's supposed to. So there's a lack of, in my mind, not just a lack of funding, but a lack of urgency and commitment by the state to address these issues. But getting back to waterless clean energy, there's a reason why they dredged John Redmond first, and because of the nuclear plant, because you have to have water to cool down the nuclear facility, and so that's really important. Those rods that get so hot and use the nuclear energy, we have to cool them down. Coal is the reason they're situated along our rivers, is because they essentially it's a form of power. It's just big steam power. You burn coal, use water to create steam, spin a turbine, there's your coal power. And so when we use clean energy like wind in Kansas, like solar, and we're getting to energy storage, that will cut down the water needs really important. Wind, it's been around for 20 years, and now it's the #1 source of power in Kansas, overtaking coal power that we used for decades. Was our chief power source. 80% of our power in the last 50, 75 years has been coal power, but just overtaking it, 40% wind, overtaking the coal just in 20 years time. So that's really important. We've saved so many gallons of water in doing so. So I think that's really important also for the climate change effects to use clean energy. So those are just a few things that I want to do to kind of start the discussion. I have some more information talking about irrigation, and we can talk about the water impairment as far as water quality issues in Kansas. But I want to just start there with a general overview about some of the issues in Kansas and what we really need to accomplish going forward. So that's just a little bit. Didn't want to throw a whole lot to you to begin with, but hopefully that was informative, and I want to get in a little deeper conversation here with question and answer. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Zach. That was great. I love your pictures. I've always thought a picture's worth 1,000 words. So, right at this point in the proceedings, we always when we were on site, we would pass the hat. Well, here we pass the link to make a contribution to support the forum and the church. So I think we've got a little video to look at.
All right, thanks for attending today. The All Souls Forum is very important to our church. It provides us a chance to discuss the significant issues that impact our community. It's also important to me personally because I get to learn about the political issues that shape our world and ask questions of our speakers. From the attempted coup on the Capitol to recycling, we discuss all of the important issues. It costs about $100 a week to produce the forum. That's less than $5 a week per person watching on an average week. Andrea, can you show us how to support the UU Forum?
I'd be happy to, Richard. You can always send a check to the church. Be sure to put forum in the memo line. You'll find the address in chat, or you can find it on our website. To pay online, you can go to the All Souls website and click the big blue button, or click the link in chat. When you get to the giving page, enter the amount that you would like to give. On the next line, be sure to pick Give to Forum so that the money comes to support the forum. After that, you can choose how often you'd like to give. You can leave it at Give This One Time, or you can pick Give This Weekly, every 2 weeks, monthly, or yearly.
I like the idea of making a payment each month. It's just easier to budget.
I agree. That's what I usually do. After that, you can choose if you'd like to give with a debit card, credit card, or ACH bank transfer. The bank transfer will ask you to enter your numbers off of your check, and it will come directly out of your checking account. Once you've chosen that, pick Continue, enter the rest of your information. Feel free to add any comments you'd like. And if you'd like to cover the processing fee, you can click the button there and then click the Give bar.
Well, that seems easy enough. And let me take a moment to just say, hey, thanks to everyone making or planning on making a contribution. Now, Andrea, you keep mentioning that the links are in the chat. How do I see that?
If you're on a computer, it will open to the right of the video of the speaker without blocking anything. If you decide you're done, you can click the X at the top to close it, and that will not move you out of the meeting.
All right. So before we move on to the Q&A, can you please remind everyone how to virtually raise your hand?
Of course. Again, bring your mouse down to the bottom of your screen and look for the reactions button with the smiley face on it. Click it and then click anywhere on the raise hand bar. Zoom will put you in queue so that the moderator can call on you in the order your hand was raised. If you want to lower your hand, just repeat the steps and the bar will now have the lower hand option. If you'd like to see where you are in the queue, you can push the participants button and you will see this view showing you the order that you will be called on.
And for those of you on a phone, you can push *9.
Anything else I can show you guys today, Richard?
No, I think that covers it. It's time for questions.
Okay, I'm supposed to select the folks, and Richard has been waiting with bated breath to ask his question.
Yeah, so thanks, Zach. I'm curious with the irrigation and stuff like that that's using up so much of this aquifer, is the problem mostly large corporate farms, or is it also a combination of large corporate farms and more smaller type farms?
Yeah, good question, Richard. You know, that's a tough one to answer because some of our family farms are incorporated. So they're kind of farm corporations. So that's a little bit tough one to answer, but we're talking, thousands of acres of farm ground in western Kansas. That's not a small number for a farm out in western Kansas. So these are large tracts. Those circles are on 640 acres for a pivot circle sort of thing. So it kind of depends, but those top users, the 150 top users that use 22% of the irrigated aquifer water are large farms. That I'd say that they've been bigger farms all the time. So I think they are either bigger family farms or farm enterprises with the number of families going on. So so anyway, I don't know if I quite answered your question there. It's a tough one to tackle. Craig, do you know any better? Can you answer that any better? I mean, certainly there's big time industries out there, ethanol industry, like we said, meat packing and slaughterhouse meat processing facilities. Those use a lot of water themselves, but the irrigators, the actual farmers, the corn producers, those are more, I think, on either the family enterprise or the consolidated enterprise.
Well, you put your finger on it. It's the problem of growing corn in a semi-arid area. That is, and the corn is not like ending up on your plate. It's ending up in a feed trough somewhere for massive feedlots, or it's being used now to make ethanol. So it's really used for industrial purposes. This is why it's called industrial agriculture. So I think you're right. That's why we have such a large use of water by only 150 users. The next person is Lon Swearingen.
What I'd like to ask is about the problem really is the rotation of crops, isn't it? As far as the runoff and other things. If they were rotating the crop, there would be more nutrients in the soil and so forth and so on, instead of putting all those other things in to make our crops look good. That's what I'm.
Yeah. No, that's a big part of it is crop rotation, and the fact that we're only rotating just a couple crops for the conventional agriculture rotation, corn and beans, and maybe some wheat in there sometimes. So what that does is, so yeah, you're right. We don't have cover on the land. Those crops are intensive, both in water and in nutrients. And so we have to subsidize that with adding extra fertilizer, oftentimes synthetic fertilizer. That fertilizer washes off and creates the agricultural runoff issue. And then why we get nitrogen in our water sources because of excess fertilizer. So there's that. If you had a better crop rotation, say put oats and peas in the mix, or a different type of cover crop, you can actually add in more nutrition. If you incorporate that material of the crop residue back in the soil, it acts as like a natural green manure. So you wouldn't have to use some of those fertilizers that have water impacts anyway. But it's also crop selection, as I mentioned. We could be growing less intensive agricultural crops out in that area, so they could still make some money off of farming, but not off of farming corn practically in a semi-arid desert-like conditions where they only get 15 inches or rainfall less a year. It's 15 inches or less rainfall a year. Isn't that amazing? And yet they're growing a crop that needs substantially a lot more water than that. I'm not exactly off the top of my head know what the water needs for corn are, but that's why they have to mine the aquifer feet every year in those places. But we're getting better. I mentioned Northwest Kansas. Well, what they've done in the top 9 counties in Northwest Kansas, farmers got together and they said voluntarily that we're all going to cut back. We know the water issue is a problem here. We're all going to cut back 20% of our water use. Okay, everybody said that, because if you don't do it, then someone else isn't going to do it, and then it's like competing again. So well, you know, we're all in this together. It's collective resource. So they decided to cut it 20%. What they found was they're actually as productive growing the crops with 20% less water than if they use 20% more water. So they've grown the same amount of crops using 20% less water. Okay, so what they found was they're actually overwatering in many cases. They can tell, well, it seems dry we haven't got rain, seems dry out there, but under the surface, there's water that we can test with soil moisture probes, is what they're called. So better testing. We don't have to water as much, and we still get the gain vegetable wise. They're resilient. So there's some of that, but also utilizing different practices. If we actually have more cover on the land, as opposed to having a field that's just dirt out there, we till it up, wait till next year to plant our crops. If we have cover on the land, in terms of plants, then those plants actually hold in moisture, believe it or not. There's not as much evaporation of the soil. The soil doesn't get as hot. So those are just a few things. I go on and on. I get pretty excited about this, but good question, Lon.
Okay, next question, Michael Duffy.
The slide of Kansas that you had showing where in the state had more or less loss of aquifer water was very interesting. It, of course, more lost than gained, but those parts of the state that gain water, you didn't comment on. Could you go back and comment on that and say, what's going on in those areas where the aquifer is actually going up instead of down, and why is that happening?
Yeah, so there is, good point. Thank you, Michael. Don't let me overlook, there's a natural recharge of the aquifer. So some places get more rain than other places. That rainwater provides water to the surface level, and those surface water bodies infiltrate the ground and interact with the groundwater table. So in some ways, there is the natural recharge that's really important. We wouldn't have as much of a problem with our groundwater supplies drying up if we utilize the natural recharge framework for using the water. So if we had a recharge of X amount, well, we could use that amount in agriculture without really having to worry too much, because it replenishes itself. So that's the first point I'd like to make. The second point is the water table moves from place to place underneath the surface too. So you can actually take up water in one place, and that could migrate water to another place. That's not quite a full dodge of your question there, but that may be impacted too. And then another way they're replenishing water sources, which is kind of interesting, is called augmentation. And that's more for surface water. But what they've been doing is taking water out of the ground for some of those streams that I saw that you saw, I showed that been drying up, to pump water in it so the streams can supply the Quivira National Wildlife Refuge, for example, because they're a water right holder, a senior water right holder, whereas some of the irrigators are junior right water holders, meaning they don't have superiority in terms of water use. So I just bring that augmentation up because that's kind of in my view, maybe others here, it's an artificial way to create more surface water by taking more groundwater resources. But that's a little bit aside the point to your question there, Michael, why we have some places, some replenishment of the water. It kind of depends on the year, whether some of those places get more water or experience declines. But in that particular chart, some of those places experience more water.
So none of the explanation is better agricultural practices then?
Right. Yeah, that's true. As we get better, and I didn't show a picture of it, but one of the things that they're doing on irrigation. So we need to reduce, essentially, we've overappropriated our water rights. We have thousands of water rights we've issued since the 70s. And many of those probably shouldn't have been appropriated, or we need at least to draw them back. It's a tough thing to do once you give the privilege of using water that people rely on for agriculture or whatever. It's hard to take that away, but we have to if we want to try to manage this issue better. For example, I think we should dramatically cut the water rights for fracking operations for oil and gas. One, because we have an opportunity to use other clean energy for transportation largely, or electricity, etc. But fracking brings up uses a whole bunch of water, and not just any water. A lot of times it's fresh water taking up, utilizing by pumping it in the ground, pressurizing the underground strata. That causes the oil and gas to flow upwards. Oftentimes we only get 1 barrel of oil for every 10 barrels of water, and that's salt water primarily. But then that water is contaminated because we introduced toxic contaminants into it, stimulants for the water to flow back up. Okay, so that's one thing, that water is then, that wastewater, the use of water, and then the wastewater that we don't recycle it, we dump it, we inject it way back into the ground where it's never used again. Wastewater disposal. Okay, and so anyway, I think we're using precious freshwater resources, but we're also contaminating it so it's never used again. At least with irrigation, that theoretically, the crops get used and all that, but that's a natural water cycle there. With oil and gas operations, with contamination, that water is ruined for good. So
Thank you.
Okay, how about Karen and Chuck?
Yeah, my question is all your information is all around the state of Kansas, but I think many of us, including Karen and I, are from the Missouri side. Just kind of wondering if you have any experience with what's the general picture look like in Missouri? Is it much the same? Or is there any differences in Missouri versus Kansas? I'll leave it open to you.
Yeah, good question, Chuck. And I realize most of us are kind of in the Kansas City metro area. One, I'll just start out. Missouri River is considered for the longest time one of the most contaminated rivers in the country. So there's that to start. Missouri also has the problem of industrial pollution, factory farms, some of those things. They do have a benefit of more water recreational access. By nature, a lot more streams flow and opportunities for kayaking, canoeing, etc. So I point that out about Missouri. But for the Kansas City metro area, more of our issue with water is going to be flooding. Okay, I put up the picture, and actually Renee commented that looks like Westport, and Westport is significant flooding issues. But the flooding issues that we experienced in 2019, for example, not too distant of a memory, pre-pandemic, granted, but not too far if we remember that extreme flooding actually impaired drinking water sources, because you have the onrush of water. The water treatment plants get compromised, and so then it becomes a drinking water problem. Also, severe storms, when we get high winds and thunderstorms that cause power outages. Those power outages can cause problems for a water treatment plant. So then there's a resiliency issue and need for backup power. But just generally, I don't think the problem changes too much. There's less drought opportunity. There is more of a heat island effect because of the urban environment there, and that can create problems with water issues and need for drinking water for our communities. You got the urban runoff issue, stormwater issue, but hopefully that gives you a little sense, a little bit of distinction there. I haven't heard of any harmful algae. I know we've had harmful algae in Leavenworth County here where I'm out, so that's not too far away from the metro area, but zebra mussels in Wyandotte County Lake and some of those things.
Carol Fields.
My father had Texas farmland, one section, and it was rotated. It was a drier area, I think. I think it's Ogallala water still down there. And they irrigated it in the 60s probably, and then quit doing it in the, I don't know, 20 years later. So from that perspective, I'm wondering, and it was, just an individual family, but the operator no doubt had sections from a bunch of other people and some land of his own when he was doing it. But he gave it up as cotton came in. So that seemed to be what was happening down there. So I wonder if Kansas is going to get at least smart enough to rotate, like it was, let's see, it was alfalfa, wheat, and the corn that isn't corn, the dark brown stuff. I can't think of the name.
Milo.
Milo, yeah, in rotation. So is
Sort of.
Kansas more ripe for that? Is that happening? Are corporate companies taking advantage of that, or your other mitigation, that slide you had with all the options, or large corporate? I think family corporate, they have that ownership, so some of them are probably making changes ahead. And was that Northwest area, did it include corporate that wasn't family large spaces when they made that pact? And is anybody else doing that? Any other areas on the way?
So a few points in your question there, really good points. Thank you, Carol. One, I appreciated the cotton is a growing, sorry for the pun, but it's a growing agriculture industry in Kansas. They're turning to do more cotton, particularly in South, Central, and Southwest Kansas, help save on water. Of course, using less intensive crops and better plant crop selection. So they're trying to use corn that uses less water. So genetically modified or plant breeding to help tackle some of those things. Changing in, so we plant a Milo crop, for example, instead of a corn crop. A number of farmers are doing that, turning to different types of crops. I know Kansas State University is studying this issue as far as crops that respond to some of our climate needs. So there's some of that. As far as my understanding goes, that there was a number of different stakeholders, farm-wise, both corporate and non-corporate, that entered into the agreement in Northwest Kansas. They're doing some of those other agreements in other places of Kansas, which is good. They've tried it in Southwest Kansas. They've had more luck in the kind of central part of Kansas. But by and large, I want to say is that those voluntary efforts, yes, if we can across the state reduce our water consumption by 20%, make a big difference. And if we do that voluntarily, by all means. But we're getting to the point where communities only have 20 years or less of water supply left, that it's costing us. I think about money and we need money and what's the cost, et cetera. But what in terms of agriculture or any enterprise or any product that's made, what is the value of it in terms of water, both the use of water and the pollution of water? Okay, and we start thinking about that, then maybe we assign a higher price for that hamburger. We assign a higher price for that ethanol, or the oil and gas that comes from fracking. Versus maybe methane we capture from our landfills, some of those things. So if we think about that in terms of what is the water costs or the water dollar amount, then we think about things a little bit differently. So anyway, I know I'm jumping all over the place here, but just a few of those thoughts come to mind.
we're getting low on time here. I'm gonna jump in here. You pointed out that the Clean Water Act was passed in 1970, which is, 50 years ago. And yet in Kansas, 96% of our lakes and 85% of our streams are impaired for one use or another. So what is prevented, and you're ideally suited to comment on this as a lobbyist for 10 years. What do you suppose? We have an agency called Kansas Department of Health and Environment that's supposed to be enforcing the Clean Water Act. What is holding us back from improving our water in Kansas?
Great question, Craig. So there's not only the Kansas Department of Health and Environment that has an impact on water, but there's the Kansas Corporation Commission, which regulates our energy, okay, and oil and gas across the state. So there's that agency. You got the Kansas Water Office, which is its own independent state agency that deals with water. You got a recommended advisory council for the water programs across the state, Kansas Water Authority. So and then you got Kansas Department of Agriculture, Division of Conservation, which actually gets the most funding for water programs across the state, is my understanding. So you got all of those entities having to deal with the same issue of water. And so if there's a question that I think our legislative leaders are reckoning with, is that too many agencies that have a small focus, a small interest in the water? Should there be a more consolidated approach to our water resource management in the state? So there's some of that. Then there's another thing where, well, there's funds that go into the state water plan fund, but I mentioned those funds have been underfunded over the past 13 years to the tune of $80 million. Well, without the urgency, the commitment to water resources in terms of dollars, we're not doing ourselves any favor by getting ahead of the water program, the challenges, right? So I think we need more funding. We can definitely do that. That'll be one from federal investment. Okay, we're talking about the budget reconciliation bill in Congress right now, the infrastructure plan. All of those would be good for drinking water. That they're aiming for $100 billion that could go to drinking water, and Kansas could get a piece of that pie, up to anywhere from $13 billion of that. That's be pretty substantial. Over the next 20 years, Kansas's infrastructure, drinking water infrastructure alone, is projected to be about $5 billion over in the next 20 years. Okay, so that's a large amount of money that we need for some of this. I'd say it's so. To answer your question, Craig, I think there's some interagency coordination that could really help. I think there's some commitment problems that we have. We need more commitment, not only in terms of programs and lessening some of the industrial polluters out there, the agricultural entities that are using too much water and contaminating too much of our water. If we were change our priorities and have a different tactic, more sustainable agriculture, less fossil fuel energy production, etc. By and large, those things would really help the water issue in Kansas. So I'd say more coordination, more funding, and better strategy going forward in our industry.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to have additional discussion after we close the recording of this here. It's about 11 o'clock. I want to mention next week, we're having Dr. Rick Randolph. He's the Senior Chief Medical Officer for Heart to Heart International, who has treated diseases like COVID for many years. And he holds a certificate in public health in the developing world. His subject is Don't Mess with Mother Nature. He will explain how harming the environment creates epidemics and how climate change and these pandemics are interconnected. So that is a powerful program coming up next week.